Hey everyone, I made a big mistake. I lost the man I loved because of my selfish actions. I deeply regret hurting him, but what hurts even more is that he chose to leave instead of working through our problems. I wish he had stayed and helped me learn from my mistakes instead of walking away. I'm truly disappointed in the choices I made. I had a wonderful man in my life, a caring partner and an amazing husband. I threw all of that away for some meaningless fling. When I was 19, I met my husband, who was 21, at a library. Before him, I had never been in a relationship on a date. I was quite introverted, and my main focus in university was my education. He approached me at the library one day and complimented me, saying he had noticed me around and wanted to get to know me better. He asked for my phone number, but I turned him down right away. I didn't want to give out my number, and I certainly wasn't looking to get involved with anyone at school. I just wanted to focus on my studies and get my degree. Over the next few months, he would often come over to the table where I was studying with my friends. Sometimes he came alone, and other times he would join in conversations with my friends. I gradually got used to seeing him every day, watching him from afar as I studied, and observing how well he got along with my friends. One day, he didn't show up at the library, and I became worried. I asked my friends if they had heard anything about his absence, but they claimed to know nothing. One of them even told me, "His life doesn't revolve around you, you know? Maybe he got tired of waiting for you and moved on." Those words stung, and at the time, I didn't fully understand why. It was only later that I realized I was falling for him, and the idea that he might have moved on hurt me deeply. He didn't show up the next day either, and I grew even more concerned. I asked my friends if any of them had his phone number so I could check on him, thinking he might be sick or in the hospital. However, they all told me that they didn't have his number because I had specifically asked them not to take it. It seemed strange in hindsight. Then, on the following day, he returned to the library, just as he always did. He walked in with his friends, said his goodbyes, and headed toward the shelves. This time, he grabbed a textbook with the code CA301 and joined us at our table. It was the first time I actually paid attention to the course material he was studying. I couldn't help but ask, "What happened to you? We didn't see you for the past 2 days." He replied with a teasing tone, "Oh, she speaks," and the table erupted in laughter. "I'm completely serious here. I didn't see you for 2 days, and I started to get worried," I mentioned as I removed my glasses. For what felt like the first time in a long semester, I looked him directly in the eyes. He gazed back at me, initially surprised, and then a smirk played on his lips. He was remarkably handsome, almost resembling a character from a cartoon. I couldn't help but wonder why it took me so long to notice. He had an average build, but his striking good looks more than compensated for it. His captivating blue eyes were like an endless abyss, and despite his modest height of just 5 feet 9 inches, he exuded a strong presence. His voice was deep and raspy, and I recall sometimes feeling the vibrations in my body when he spoke. It may sound silly, but it's moments like those that I miss the most right now. "You, worried about me?" He responded after a brief pause, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I would believe you, but I'm not even sure you know what my name is," he added with a playful tone. "Stanley," I replied immediately, prompting laughter from my friends at the table. "You see, you don't even know my name," he teased, joining in the laughter. "That's a nickname I got back in junior high, and it stuck with me all the way here. Besides, it's not Stan Lee, it's Stan Lee, like the owner of Marvel Comics," he clarified. He then got up and moved to a different table, opting to sit alone. I had never seen him sit in the library before, let alone sit alone. It felt like he had heard me, and I felt guilty for not knowing his name. I couldn't help but steal glances at him, nervously biting my nails and secretly hoping he'd return to our table or at least glance back at me. He spent the next 3 hours engrossed in the books he had taken from the shelf. With exams approaching, it was understandable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the reason for his shift in attention. "If you miss him that much, you should go talk to him," my friend Sophia suggested. "No way," I muttered as I put my glasses back on and returned to my own books. I already had a solid grasp of the material in the book I was studying, and I was well into my exam preparations. I continued flipping through the pages, contemplating whether I should actually approach him. Eventually, I gave in, stood up, and walked over to the table where he was sitting. "Hey, I'm sorry," I said, in what he would later describe as the cutest, anime-style apology ever. He looked up at me, raising an eyebrow in that way he did when he wanted someone to repeat themselves. I took a seat at the table across from him. Starting a conversation was a bit challenging, and he seemed to notice. He assured me that he wasn't upset or anything. Even though he wasn't thrilled that I didn't know his name, he explained that he had moved to a different table because he needed to focus on studying for an important test. He mentioned that the professor was strict and didn't give out good grades easily. He emphasized how crucial it was for him to pass the course and avoid an additional year in college. He also playfully added that he would have stayed at our table, but he found it more appealing to spend time looking at me rather than reading. I mustered the courage to ask, "So, what's your name then?" He closed his book, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Daniel. Let me introduce you to Daniel," he said, extending his hand for a handshake. I had always thought that Daniel and Daniel would make the perfect couple name, and I still believe that. I just couldn't understand why I had blown my earlier chance. As I got up to leave, he reached for my hand, and I felt a jolt of excitement. "If you're not too busy tomorrow, I'd like to take you out after my test," he suggested. Deep down, I was thrilled that he asked me on a date. I knew that if he had asked earlier, I would have likely jumped at the chance, but now I was flustered, with butterflies in my stomach for this young man. Honestly, I wish I had a time machine. I would have done things differently. I would have listened to him more, put in more effort to make him happy, and been less selfish. But here I am, seeking some sort of sympathy from strangers as I cry and reminisce about the good times I shared with my Daniel. Our date went really well, and I thoroughly enjoyed his company. He had a great sense of humor and shared meaningful thoughts. He was charismatic, and I couldn't help but notice the jealous looks from other girls when they saw us together. During our date, he mentioned that he had been the runner-up for Mr. UCLA, and I couldn't help but think it was well-deserved because there were few guys better looking than him. Our relationship during something out time at UCLA was like of a high school romance novel. He was always invited to parties, and when he attended, we walked hand in hand. We were inseparable and even earned the title of the most influential couple in his last semester at school, mostly thanks to him because no one really knew me before we started dating. He was my first everything. First date, first kiss, first love, and so on. However, I wasn't his first. He had experienced everything before, except for getting married. He was patient with me, always taking the time to explain things I didn't understand and rarely getting angry. I constantly compared our sexual experiences, and I felt dissatisfied that he was the only one on my list. I wanted to have more experiences to brag about. I thought it was a rational idea to sleep with other people to level the playing field. Several months after we got married, I began discussing the idea of opening up our marriage. I had previously mentioned it, but his strong rejection made me fear I'd lose him if I pursued it. One day, I asked him what his reaction would be if we opened things up a bit. His straightforward response, "I'll leave without a second thought," infuriated me. I felt like he was unfairly restricting me, especially when he had his own adventures before we were together. I waited for a few more months and raised the topic again, but he gave the same unwavering answer. This convinced me to wait until after we got married, thinking he might see things from my perspective once we tied the knot. When we finally did get married, I decided to bring it up once more. I have to admit, it was selfish of me to marry him just so I could explore my sexuality without losing the man I loved. I believed that now that I had him, I could do as I pleased. I deeply regret not listening and understanding his feelings about it. I ignored his words, and now I despise myself for letting my one true love slip away. They say opportunities only come once, and I now realize that I've lost my one chance at being loved for who I am. Many years after losing Daniel, I haven't found anyone who treats me as well as he did or loves me anywhere close to how he did. Our honeymoon lasted 4 months, or it would have been a 4-month holiday if I hadn't ruined it. We had been together for 5 years, and my desire to be intimate with other men began 3 years into our relationship. During our honeymoon, I had fantasies of being with someone else while my husband watched, which is something I deeply regret. There's often a temptation or motivator for committing terrible acts, and my motivation was a man named Tom. He was tall, standing at 6 feet 5 inches, and maintained a regular workout routine. He looked like a giant with strong muscles and always wore outfits that showcased the hours he spent in the gym. I'm relatively tall myself, standing at 6 feet 1 inch, so encountering someone who made me feel small was a unique experience. He was a new addition to my workplace and ended up being my superior in the hierarchy, which meant I had to report to him daily. He was in his 30s, older than my husband, or should I say my ex-husband. He had a very flirtatious demeanor, always soft-spoken as if he were trying to seduce me. Reporting to him every day became a challenge because I had to maintain professionalism while being incredibly attracted to him. Then one day, he asked me to go for drinks with him. I couldn't believe my ears. Was he hitting on me, or was he just being friendly? Did he have a genuine interest in me, or did he notice my attraction and want to take advantage of it? These thoughts swirled in my head. I didn't consider how my dear Daniel would feel, nor did I think much about hurting him. We went for drinks at a bar near the office, and I had more to drink than I should have. Our conversation shifted from getting to know each other to a more private and intimate discussion not meant for public ears. I wanted to be more than just one man's woman. I told him about my wish to open up my marriage for sexual liberation without guilt, and I even admitted to having a crush on him. When he asked if I had discussed this with my husband, I replied, yes, but he doesn't see things the way I do, and he mentioned that he'd leave if I went ahead with it. Tom then gave me advice that, in hindsight, was foolish. At that time, I was seeking anything that would relieve me of the responsibilities of my choices. He suggested that instead of asking my husband, I should tell him that we should open up the marriage for me to have my fun. Looking back, I realized that Tom was a person who gave terrible advice with unwavering confidence that it was the best course of action. Now I understand he said those things because he wanted to be with me. That night, he made me feel like the most important person in the world. I know it was the same treatment I received from my Daniel every day, but getting that from a different man for the first time ever made me feel like a teenager again. We parted ways that day after sharing a kiss. When I got home, my husband was sleeping in the living room, Probably because he had been waiting for me to return from work. I entered quietly, went to the bathroom to shower and brush my teeth to get rid of the alcohol smell. I was still a little tipsy, but I could control it. I woke him up and told him I needed to talk to him about something. He mentioned that he had something exciting to share as well, but let me go first. He had a beautiful smile on his face as he listened attentively. However, his smile disappeared in seconds. I didn't mind because I had convinced myself that I was doing the right thing. I told him, I just want you to know that I have to do this. I can't handle the fact that you're much more experienced than I am. It makes me feel like you settled for me. I don't want to be the girl you settled for. I want to be desired and admired by other men just as you were with other women before we met. I don't think I can be happy unless I do this. We're opening up the marriage, and it's not up for discussion. Those were the hurtful words I said to the man who loved me when others called me a werned, a nickname I got in college, derived from weird nerd. Those were the words I used with a man who made those nicknames disappear, the man who gave me some of the attention I always thought I deserved. These words haunt me, and I cry every time I remember that situation. What kind of foolish young lady was I? He looked into my eyes for a while, then lowered his head as if he had been defeated. He sat there in silence for what felt like an hour before saying, "Well, you've said your piece, so I guess that's that." He got up and went to the bedroom, leaving me wondering about what he had wanted to tell me earlier. He dismissed it, saying it was nothing, and blamed his tiredness on overthinking at the office. The following day, I went straight into my boss's arms. We were intimate in his office that morning, and that was just the beginning. Tom was my first intimate partner who wasn't Daniel. There were many more to follow. I often went out with my coworkers on Fridays to their regular TGIF spot and would occasionally wake up on a Saturday next to a stranger I had never met before and would never meet again. I was promiscuous, to say the least. I believed it was just a phase and that I would eventually grow out of it, but I didn't realize the price I would have to pay for my newfound enlightenment. I continued to engage with different men almost every day or every other day. 2 months later, as I was preparing for work, Tom showed up at my house. He was supposed to pick me up, assuming my husband had already left for work as usual. I thought I could seize the opportunity for a quick encounter before heading to the office together. My husband opened the door to Tom, who was holding a bouquet of flowers. I couldn't hear their conversation over the sound of the running shower as I was washing my hair. When I stepped out, they were exchanging pleasantries. Daniel even cracked a joke, saying, "So you're the guy who screws my wife while I'm busy changing light bulbs?" Daniel was never one to show emotions, whether it was anger, pain, disappointment, or sorrow. You couldn't easily read him. The only things he would show were a smile or a frown. So, I genuinely believed that he was completely fine with our open marriage arrangement. He even went as far as holding the door open for me as I got into Tom's car. My young and naive mind couldn't grasp the grave mistake I had made for my marriage. During our ride to the office, Tom joked about how well my husband seemed to be taking the open marriage concept. He made remarks about my husband possibly being a cook and even suggested, if he wants to watch, we can arrange that. That day was a Friday, but unlike every other Friday in the past 2 months, I didn't go out with my coworkers. Instead, my boss Tom and I reserved a hotel with glass windows that provided a nice view of the city's nightlife. That night, we had a satisfying intimate encounter. On the following Saturday, when I returned home and opened the door, I immediately sensed a difference in the atmosphere. It was unusually quiet. My husband and I typically didn't work on Saturdays, and he would spend the mornings playing his favorite songs loudly on the speakers. Even when I arrived home in the early hours after working late or having one of my affairs, he would still have his music playing loudly. I headed to our in-house gym, only to find that he wasn't on the treadmill as he usually was on Saturdays. Then, I went to the kitchen, hoping to find that he had at least made coffee, as was his habit. I noticed my favorite cup sitting on the kitchen counter, which brought a smile to my face, as it was a reminder of the life we had shared since moving in together 3 years before our 2-year marriage. I picked up the cup, intending to take a sip, but it was empty. Upon opening the cup, I discovered an enveloped letter inside. I can't recall the exact contents of the letter, but I've kept it as a memento of how I let something beautiful fall apart due to my desire for more romantic encounters. I'm deeply disappointed in myself. I've made numerous foolish mistakes in my life, but allowing Daniel to slip away like that ranks as the most foolish decision I've ever made. I retrieved the letter from the envelope, leaving it in the cup that still carried his scent on the inside after 5+ years. The note read, "Hey, I hope you're doing well. You're probably wondering why you can't hear Smooth Criminal playing on the speakers right now. By the time you read this, I will likely have arrived in South Africa. My company is launching a 5-year program to nurture the brightest computer-literate minds in Africa, and I'll be spending the next 5 years there. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about your infidelity. When I return, we will begin divorce proceedings. I hope Tom's company, and the other men you've been with, were worth it. When you first mentioned it, I thought you were joking, but yesterday confirmed otherwise. I regret ever knowing you. If I could change one thing in my life, it would have been leaving the first time you said no. You're really not worth the pain you've caused me over the years, and I won't pretend otherwise. I don't hope for good things for you. Alongside the note, there was a flight ticket dated for Saturday, June 7, 2014, and a passport with my name on it. On the back of the flight ticket, there was a message that said, "Remember the news I shared with you 2 months ago? This is it. My company is sponsoring both of us to stay in South Africa. They're even offering you a job." At the bottom of the cup, I found his wedding ring. My entire world crumbled before me. I spent the rest of that day just staring at the cup. I couldn't eat or drink anything. I was completely consumed by shock. The following year was a long period of depression as my life slowly unraveled, starting with the day when Tom's best friend, Elias, came to collect all of Tom's belongings. I was sobbing uncontrollably as I watched him and the movers take away Tom's possessions, which had become sentimental to me. Elias, out of kindness, allowed me to keep a box of Tom's cologne and his favorite hoodie, but he returned the next day to retrieve them. He walked in on me still wearing the same outfit I had worn to work on Friday. Weak from crying for over 24 hours, I couldn't put up a fight as Elias angrily took the hoodie from my hands. He looked at me with disdain and said, "Stanley told me about what you did. You've brought disgrace upon women everywhere, and I hope you carry this regret for the rest of your life." He then grabbed the cologne and left, remarking, "If it weren't for the laws of this country, I'd spit in your face. I hope your life turns out as sad and empty as this room." Elias was never one to hold back his thoughts. His words hurt me then, but they hurt even more now, as my home has been nothing but sad and empty since my beloved half left me. Just a week after the incident, Tom was transferred again, this time by his own request. I asked him why he had requested the transfer, believing that we were building something together. He bluntly told me he was moving away from me, that he had enjoyed himself and it was time to move on. He also advised me to close my marriage with Tom before it was too late, not realizing that it had already been too late a week ago. My next boss was extremely strict. It didn't take long before I received a reprimand for my mistakes due to my instability at that time, and because I wasn't involved romantically with him, it wasn't long before I was fired from the job. My parents disowned me after Elias informed them about what had happened. They were devoutly religious people, both ministers at the church I grew up attending. In their view, they didn't want to be associated with someone they considered immoral, someone who would end her marriage just to seek the touch of another man's hands running down her thighs. I kept my communication lines open in the hope that Tom would reach out to me. The 5 years he mentioned came and went without a word from him, and I didn't hear any news of him returning to the country. When I tried to contact Elias, I found out that he had joined Tom in South Africa a year later. I began losing all my friends. It became clear to me that most of my friends had merely tolerated me. I realized that the only positive thing I had going for me was being one half of the former couple. I discovered that I wasn't funny and that I wasn't even pleasant to be around. I came to understand that I could be an extremely difficult person to be with. All these realizations brought me down to rock bottom. After Elias left me, I didn't simply return to square one, I sank even lower into a negative place. Now, in 2023, at the age of 36, nearly a decade later, I've never had a relationship that lasted beyond the initial 3 months. I'm deeply unhappy with my life, and sometimes I wish for a peaceful passing in my sleep. I occasionally blame Daniel for leaving me so abruptly. I hope that any woman contemplating opening up her marriage reads this and steers clear of that dreadful mistake of an idea. I still hold on to the hope that one day I'll cross paths with Daniel. I want to apologize and tell him that I haven't moved on, that even though 10 years have passed, I still love him. I want to convey how hurting him was the worst thing I ever did and how I had wanted to build a new life with him. My dating life has also suffered greatly. No one wants to be with the woman who shattered her husband's heart just because she wanted to explore something different. I've been in several relationships, but whenever the story comes up, I can literally see the love drain from the faces of these men. I continue to live in the house that Daniel and I purchased together. It's a small bungalow because we envisioned a small family. I desperately need closure, but I haven't been able to afford therapy because I haven't been able to hold down a job since I was fired 10 years ago by my replacement boss. I've been struggling financially. Thank you for taking the time to read through this rather lengthy account. Update. This update covers what has transpired since I posted this 2 months ago. For those who didn't see my previous post, this is an update on how my husband, or ex-husband depending on your perspective, left me when I decided to open up our marriage. It's been over 9 years since his departure, and during these years, I've come to realize how I've become virtually nothing without him. I lost everyone close to me, mostly because they adored him and only tolerated me out of necessity. However, for the first time since he left, things have started to take a positive turn. Firstly, I believe he saw my previous post because not long after I posted it, he gave me a call. Hearing his voice after such a long time brought me joy. I missed the deep, raspy baritone of his voice that always sent shivers down my spine. During our hours-long conversation, I couldn't help but cry as I listened to how much I had hurt him. He confessed that he never believed I would go through with it and initially thought it was one of my late April Fool's pranks. He revealed that a part of him died when he saw and spoke with Tom. He felt like a fool and blamed himself for staying until I broke him. He explained why he chose not to return after the initial 5 years. It took him that long to get over me. Towards the end of the program, he began finding happiness again. He admitted that he didn't want to see me because being in the same room as me would jeopardize his newfound happiness. In return, I shared the story of how my life had unfolded. Throughout what felt like a 2-hour phone call, tears streamed down my face as we reminisced about the good times, and I couldn't help but regret letting this man slip away. At the end of our conversation, he informed me that he would be in the US within a week and planned to visit me at the house. True to his word, he arrived at my house a week later, not to rekindle our relationship, but to deliver the divorce papers. He witnessed the misery that had engulfed my life within the house. He noticed the cup with the letter and his ring still at the bottom. He observed how the rooms he had emptied remained vacant, even almost a decade later. For the first time in my acquaintance with him, I finally managed to discern his emotions. Pity. I saw pity in his eyes as he inquired about my life, and I shared more details with him that I hadn't already conveyed over the phone. He inquired about Tom, referring to unattractive, muscular man. Him as a tall, I recounted the sequence of events, how Tom had entered picture, spent 2 months with me, and then departed. He clicked his tongue in disapproval, a habit he might have picked up during his time in Africa. Shaking his head, he remarked, "So, you threw away a 7-year relationship for just 2 months of sex?" Then he inquired about the quality of the sexual experience. To be completely honest, no one had ever treated me as well as Daniel did in the bedroom. He knew my desires inside and out and had a knack for satisfying them. He wasn't like the other men who were simply interested in quick encounters. It saddened me to admit that I had sacrificed everything that defined me for something Daniel excelled at even more than the other 14 men I had been with over time. Out of compassion, he offered to cover the cost of therapy for me. He mentioned that he had moved on, and he believed I deserved to move on as well. In that moment, he made me feel like the center of the universe one last time, and then he departed. We have now finalized the divorce, and I'm 1 month into therapy, all thanks to Daniel. I'm grateful for the wonderful man that God brought into my life, and I still harbor regret for ruining it. However, it's time to concentrate on becoming a better person, even if it took me 36 years to realize it. I want to express my gratitude once more to all of you for reading this. I hope nothing else arises that would compel me to return here, and I aspire to finally move forward in life.